Hello, I'm Arnie Burr from the Sons of the American Revolution, Kern Chapter. What started and what caused the American Revolution? Most of the people along the Atlantic seaboard were British citizens, and so they still had a feeling for Great Britain and the King of England and Parliament. And when I say Parliament, that's the government. And the Parliament and the King demanded certain things prior to the Revolutionary War. There were two major powers in the world at the time. One were the French, one were the British. The French wanted some of the American land. They wanted to settle in America just like the British had. And so they came in through Canada and down into the Ohio Valley, and they made friends with the Indians. Well, the British were very upset with this because they wanted to be able to move their colonies westward across the Appalachian Mountains into that same area. There was a war that broke out. It's called the French and Indian War. When that war finally ended, the British won, and they were able to continue to claim the eastern seaboard and all of Canada, basically, down in through Pennsylvania, which would have been the Ohio Valley. But that war cost them a lot of money. So in order to pay for that war, they started taxing, and they started having tariffs on their products. The British controlled everything that came in to the colonies, and anything that left the colonies had to go on British ships. So the British were collecting at both ends. Taxation without representation. They were not getting represented in Parliament in England. The British, in order to enforce all these taxes and tariffs, brought in about 3,000 soldiers into Boston. And so they had a few soldiers out front, and they started getting a little harassed, and more people came, more soldiers came out. Before it ended, 5 people were killed and 6 more were wounded, all civilians. The British loved their tea, and they were very upset that they had to buy the tea from the British, and then they had to pay a tax on top of that tea from the British. They, in turn, had what is known as the Boston Tea Party. Patriots dressed up like Indians threw the boxes of tea overboard. The British lost all the revenue they would have got from the tea, and they would lost, of course, all the taxes they would have got off that tea. It just led to the point of saying, you know, we've had enough of England. We've had enough of the king. We've had enough of Parliament. We want to be independent. In 1774, we had our first Continental Congress. What they said is, let's write a letter to the King of England and the Parliament and see if they will meet our requests or demands. And there was nothing resolved. The British heard that the people in the town of Concord and Lexington were collecting supplies. They were collecting gunpowder. They were trying to find some cannons. They needed to build an arsenal because they knew at some point they were going to fight the British. The British are on one side. and the militias on one side, which are the farmers, storekeepers, and so on. Somebody fired a shot. The shot heard around the world because that was basically the starting of the Revolutionary War, that first encounter. They realized that what the British are doing, they get no support from the King, Parliament, and so they decided they would start working on developing a document of independence. Who wrote the Declaration of Independence? John Adams appointed George Washington the Commander-in-Chief of the Continental Army. Who was George Washington? This war went on for 7 years. The last of the actual battles was in Yorktown in 1781. And we had support from the French. So the French ships went around into the harbor of Yorktown and prevented Cornwallis from retreating and prevented Cornwallis's ships to come in with more men and with supplies. In France in 1783, the Paris Peace Treaty officially ended the American Revolutionary War.